The final topic for Chapter 3, we're going to discuss chronic offenders. Other names for these folks: persistent offenders, career criminals. They commit crimes over and over again. It is what they do. This small group of individuals accounts for a majority of the criminal offenses. A study, the delinquency in a birth cohort, was a study conducted by criminologists Wolfgang, Figlio, and Selin. What they did was they followed the same group of boys over an 18-year period. They found that this group, 54% of them were repeat offenders, and the other 46 were merely one-time offenders. And they even broke down the repeat offenders into two groups: the non-chronic recidivist group and the chronic recidivist group. The non-chronic, those are the folks who were arrested more than once but less than 5 times, and the chronic were those that were arrested 5 times or more. And what this study further showed was that the chronic offenders, which made up 6% of the group, engaged in committing the serious offenses, and that the punishment and the court system didn't have any effect or deter any of their behavior. These criminologists did a second study with a different group of individuals, which included women, and they saw a similar pattern arise. The one difference is when they looked at the gender. However, women made up 1% of the chronic offenders, so less likely to commit the serious offenses. Similar studies, after this study, similar studies were conducted nationwide and even worldwide, and the results revealed similar results regarding a chronic, what constitutes a chronic offender. Or at least saw these patterns arise out of these different groups, resulting in chronic offenders, those that are arrested 5 or more times. And what causes one to become a chronic offender is what I want to talk about next. So what causes this? The belief is that at-risk youths, and those folks are defined as young people who are extremely vulnerable to the negative consequences of school failure, substance abuse, and early sexuality. That these at-risk youths, they begin committing crimes early, and then they tend to be chronic offenders. They continue it on to their adult life. So it's an early onset, as they say. It starts at that level. Implications of this chronic offender concept. Conclusions that can be drawn include the possibility that chronic offenders pose some trait in and of themselves, that this trait is responsible for their behavior, this one trait, because most folks don't commit crimes, regardless of the circumstances. So there's one trait. So what is it about someone that continues to do it over and over again, disregard the law, and has no fear of being punished? This concept has been this chronic offender concept has been the prime focus of crime control and the policy behind it. And, since these folks, chronic offenders, continue to engage in criminal conduct and without any real effect with regards to the law or any punishment on them, the only thing that is left, this is what policy and crime control has been focusing on. If there's disregard for the law and the punishment, and they continue to do it over and over again, there's only one thing left, and that is the punishment is incarceration. There's no room left for rehabilitation. So, the criminal justice system has several things in play with regard to the chronic offender. And as a result, laws have been passed, mandatory sentencing. The mandatory sentencing has been implemented for those who commit serious violent crimes: robbery, murder, rape, arson, assault with a deadly weapon, anything that's deemed a serious violent crime. And it's also mandatory sentencing for high-level drug charges in state and in federal, the federal criminal justice system and the state's criminal justice system. So what that means is, if somebody's convicted of one of those, they go to prison. That's it. There's no other avenue. It's mandated by the law, in the law. Most states and the federal government, and New York does too, has what's called a 3 strikes rule. In New York, it's deemed the persistent felony offender status is what happens for these chronic offenders. In federal court, they call them career criminal status. And what happens is sentence is significant. It's 25 to life. And if, I'll explain it with examples here in the federal system, if an individual has 2 prior felony drug convictions in their history, regardless of how long ago they are, regardless of whether they are federal convictions or state convictions, if that person standing before the court being sentenced to a current drug charge, they can be deemed a career criminal, and they would be facing a sentence of 25 to life. That's pretty serious, because your felony drug offense could be, in New York, it doesn't take much for your drug offense to be deemed a felony. In New York, you just need felony convictions, regardless of what they are. If you have 2 or more felony convictions in the state of New York, the 3rd time around, you can be deemed a persistent felony offender and face a significant sentence of 25 to life. Now, we can talk about it and I could tell you about it, but the reality is those standards are very hard. It's not automatic. Oh, look, 2 felony convictions. This is a felony conviction. Boom, 25 to life. Doesn't quite work that easily. If it's a avenue the prosecutor wants to pursue, they have to make an application to the court, and the court has to hold a hearing to determine whether or not it would be an appropriate status. The judge does not have to deem somebody a persistent felony offender or a career criminal, just based on the causes. In some federal cases, that is the case. The judge's hands are tied, but we won't go into that. I just wanted you to understand that it's not quite that easy. There is a process to make it happen, but it is certainly there with the goal to keep chronic offenders off the streets. Truth in sentencing policies have been implemented, and what this requires, this is more along the lines of corrections, where the individual who's convicted of a crime that requires mandatory sentence or one of these 3 strikes, it requires that the individual serve a good portion of their sentence, meaning they don't get any good time or merit time or any early release programming within the correction system. They have to serve a good majority of their sentence before they can be released to the community. So it really remains to be seen whether these mandatory sentences or these 3 strike policies or the truth in sentencing policies deters career criminals, or what effects it may have, or what effect it has on the crime rate. But that's for the criminologist to figure out. But these things were created as a result of the chronic offender. So, chronic offenders. This was a short one. It wraps up chapter 2. There's a couple assignments and the quiz for this. And as always, if you have any questions, let me know.